Welcome to the 8th annual Dragon Ball Dissection December, the month-long marathon of new Dragon Ball Dissection episodes. Last year we focused exclusively on the television series with Babidi TV. This year we are continuing our look at the main series and the Majin Buu arc, where we have yet to be introduced to this Majin Buu. However, with every step the heroes take down the multi-floor arena that is Babbidi's ship, we get closer and closer to cataclysmic doom. Or as I like to call it, fun for the entire family. Babbidi's ship is basically a reverse muscle tower. It is a level-by-level series of challenges that have to be overcome before moving on to the next one. The only difference is, this time we start at the top and work our way down, rather than starting near the bottom and working our way up. And may I point out that, like with Muscle Tower, I love that Toriyama devotes a page to exploring the layout of the ship, labeling every area, and even creating areas that aren't necessarily ever seen in the story itself. It's a nice attention to detail, and I appreciate that it takes into account how it could actually work as a spaceship despite never needing to be used in that capacity. Again, convincing world building isn't as important as storytelling, but it does serve as the spice to any great dish. The setup here is that each floor is guarded by one of Babbidi's minions. Each minion has to be defeated before a hole in the floor opens up, allowing them to continue on. But this isn't simply fun and games for Babidi. He can take the hero's damage energy and add it to the collection used to resurrect Majin Buu. But the heroes have to get through every fight in order to reach Babidi and Dabra at the bottom, and Dabra has to be defeated to free Krillin and Piccolo. In some respects, we are simply trading out one style of tournament for another. This is basically the Uranai Baba style team tournament. We got all that? Good. I've said before that the stronger the characters become, the fewer situations there are that they can be convincingly put into. Even during Muscle Tower, I posit it wouldn't have been impossible for Goku to simply have gone straight to the top using his Nyoibo. We are well beyond that. As Vegeta likes to grumble, he could simply destroy the ship and bypass all of these games. And good on Toriyama to point out the obvious and come up with a reason why they wouldn't simply do that. Kaioshin is concerned that such destructive force could break Majin Buu's seal, and even if he's not at full power, it would still be too dangerous. That holds the characters in check so they play by the rules. Remember though that by coming in here at all, they have demonstrated they aren't necessarily beholden to following Shin's orders. It's a surprisingly tenuous alliance, which could break down, and I think Toriyama is smart to play up that drama. The problem this results in for a lot of people is the diminishing of anything sinister, mysterious, or intimidating about Kaioshin. He basically becomes the nanny of the group at this point. Again, it's a big part of how he slides so easily into the Trunks role from last time. Trunks enters as this unstoppable badass, but a significant part of his role after that is in trying to keep the other characters, especially Vegeta, from acting recklessly. And like with Trunks, certain mistakes in his warnings cause other characters, Vegeta, to undermine him. As a matter of fact, I think this works quite successfully for this section of the story in serving two separate tones and objectives. One of those is the slow undermining of this alliance that's going to help push a big twist later. But I joked in the last story how Trunks would absolutely be throwing his hands up in the air had he been present for Goku's tactical meeting. You know, the one where he comes up with the brilliant plan of just letting things happen. Well, new Trunks gets to be present for that stuff, and it's suitably hilarious. We witness his horror at realizing he just recruited a bunch of reckless idiots to help him save the universe. And on the flip side of that, Toriyama presents his classic gag of a character underestimating someone like Goku. Because, for a while, this recklessness pays off. Vegeta might be a bit gruff, but Goku shares the same mindset, playing it off as a, hey, don't worry about it, fighting one-on-one is totally fine. Personally, I think Kaioshin gets a bad rap and isn't nearly as pathetic or ineffectual as the larger fan base seems to paint him. I mean, let's be real. Just like Cell becoming perfect, we know that this plan has to fail to some degree. There's not going to be a story if Majin Buu stays in that ball. To an extent, there has to be a flaw in the plan. And let's be even realer. We all know exactly what the flaw in the plan is. There is one person to blame for all of this going south. It's not Kaioshin, and, well, you know, that's not for today. But you know what I'm talking about. To an extent, this encounter is a game of strategy, which I appreciate, and because of that, there is less of a clear right or wrong answer. Since such a huge monkey wrench is going to be thrown into the events, it's impossible to say who's right or wrong, or if following Kaioshin's advice to the T would have worked out. Let's take just the initial order. Don't go into the ship. Well, there's a reason for that. That puts them into these fights from which their damage energy will be taken and used to help revive Buu. It is reasonable that Kaioshin would want to avoid that. But really, what is the alternative? Just sit out there and do nothing? Goku and the others take a calculated risk that they can make their way through this ship without providing enough energy to awaken Buu. That's another valid decision, and one that appears to have merit at the beginning. Again, were it not for what's going to happen, that probably would have worked just fine too. It's this difference in philosophy that puts them in conflict. Kaioshin is going to advocate for a more cautious route, the others are, to varying degrees, going to push for more active resolutions. So why does this mentality work for Trunks but not for Kaioshin in terms of how the audience receives them? Well, I think Toriyama strikes a better balance with Trunks. When Trunks is wrong, it tends to be because the situation ends up being worse than he warned. Therefore, his message of caution continues to hold weight, even if time travel has caused the details to fluctuate. The fact that number 19 and number 20 end up being relatively easy to beat at first appears to undermine Trunks' message, but Trunks hitting them with "I don't even know who these guys are" sets it back on track again. Kaioshin miscalculates but in the opposite direction. He underestimates how strong his allies are, and that's what causes them, Vegeta, to lose faith in him. The fact that he always seems to be one step behind his allies, continually surprised by what they can do, rather than Kaioshin surprising them, diminishes his presence. Trunks is recommending caution against enemies who are kicking 5 kinds of ass. Kaioshin is freaking out over enemies that Vegeta and the others don't think are that big of a deal. Even Dabra, they estimate, is on par with Cell. So even though Buu is exactly the threat Kaioshin warns about, which ultimately more than validates his caution, his credibility with the audience is somewhat shredded before then. Coupled with that is the fact that Kaioshin really never has a moment to be impressive. He's creepy, he's mysterious, he gets Piccolo to freak out for 5 seconds. Trunks is introduced by effortlessly killing 2 Friezas back when killing 2 Friezas is a really big deal. The most Kaioshin accomplishes is momentarily immobilizing Gohan, something even he eventually admits to himself was much harder than he expected it to be. Those actions set a baseline for how the character is perceived by the audience. Trunks is never as impressive again, but he is introduced in a very good place, far above nearly all the other characters. As such, I can see why Trunks leaves a better impression, and I'm not even someone who thinks a character's worth is defined by how cool they are. Kaioshin probably needed to take out one of these minions by himself and in a manner that impresses the other characters. But if he were to do that, then it would hinder the story Toriyama wants to tell, which is Vegeta losing confidence in him. So you see the problem. I think Kaioshin is completely in the right. He doesn't know everything, and as such, he is playing a much more cautious hand. And for this type of story thread, which is barely maintaining this tenuous balance between let's play by the rules and let's blow this sucker up, it's exactly the type of character Kaioshin needs to be in this moment. But I think it's why so heavily reusing the Trunks template causes him to be viewed so negatively. I'd wager even people who aren't consciously aware of the similarities end up seeing him as a poor substitute. So nearly 4 years after I brought it up, we have now reached the point where what was once used to illustrate that the villains were over-the-top parodies is now being used by 2 of the 3 characters who once viewed the former act with such disdain. Yep, I'm talking about Goku, Gohan, and Vegeta playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to fight. Obviously, Dragon Ball has a long history with that joke, as it serves as the pun creating Goku's first signature attack, the Janken. The joke there being that the word for rock, paper, scissors, Janken, ends in the same sound that is also used to refer to a technique, such as Kaioken, Taioken, Shishin no Ken. With Kaioshin serving the role he does in the greater group dynamic, Toriyama uses this gag to play up the contrast of these battle maniac Saiyans brimming with overconfidence, while their ally and even their enemies think them absolutely insane. Which they are. I do think it's somewhat inconsistent, but it's not that big of a deal. Strict internal consistency can bow to the needs of storytelling, and if you think this gag, which furthers this dynamic, is worth a tiny trade-off, then there you go. Pui Pui, the minion who killed Yamu, is the first to fight, and Vegeta wins the contest to lead off their team. There really isn't much of a fight. Vegeta declares that in order to not give Buu any damage energy, he simply won't take any damage, and he does a pretty good job of staying true to his word. Babidi attempts to tip the scales in Pui Pui's favor by transporting them to Pui Pui's home planet, Zune. And have I mentioned that I love the fact that this story arc is using magic? Pui Pui brags he'll have the advantage because the gravity is 10 times that of Earth. Vegeta shrugs that 10 times gravity means nothing to him and kills Pui Pui. This is something I've always wondered. Obviously, no matter what the reason, 10 times gravity is indeed going to be nothing for Vegeta. Is Toriyama throwing out a very subtle reference to the fact that Vegeta is native to a planet that has that exact level of gravity? Given how it's worded, I can't help but think it's possible that Toriyama's referring solely to the fact that Vegeta has trained in much heavier gravity. The line works perfectly fine either way, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Toriyama totally forgot that little detail. The portal sticks around regardless of the magic spell, so the heroes descend to the next level of the ship, Gohan commenting that this is like a video game. I'm just happy that Gohan has had a chance to play a video game and has perhaps indulged in other leisure activities. I wonder what games he'd be into. Anyway, next up is Yakon, surprising Dabra that Babidi is using him so soon. I find that remark reminiscent of Akuman's early appearance in Uranai Baba's tournament. Okay, there is a lovely thread on the Kanzenshu.com forums, Herm's Guide, his guide to the various guides he has made in forum threads that have yet to make their way to the website proper. One of the ones I get the most use out of is his name pun roundup, which details all the known name puns as well as his best guesses for those that have not been officially confirmed. Yakon is one of the latter. Continuing the trend of Babidi's henchmen being named for magic words, he posits the name Yakon comes from the 1960s series Himitsu no Akko-chan, the forerunner of the magical girl genre. Toriyama would have been around 8 when the manga first came out. In that series, Akko-chan's transformation phrase is a shortened portmanteau of the words Technical Magic My Compact, which becomes Tekumaku My Yakon. And there, at the end, is Yakon. Something interesting about Yakon is that he's said to be a Maju. And I'm going to head off the clever person in the comments who's going to say, he's like a mother, and he's of the Jewish faith. Yes, I get enough of those in my Mighty Morphin Jew Ranger videos. Because yes, Jew Ranger means Beast Ranger. If Majin means demon person, then Maju means demon beast, the non-human equivalent. This has potentially interesting implications. Besides Majin Buu, Yakon is the only other character in the series to be explicitly given such a designation. Since Majin Buu, for our intents and purposes, is an artificial creation of Babidi, this might initially imply that Yakon is likewise created by magic. But we know he's not because, like with Pui Pui, we are going to visit his home planet. So like Pui Pui and Dabra, Yakon appears to have been an existing creature plucked up and made to work for Babidi. But it's Kaioshin who refers to him as such. Kaioshin knows who he is and that he is a Maju, just like he recognized Dabra as the king of the Makai. That would seemingly imply that Yakon was a Maju even before Babidi claimed him. And that complicates things because it brings us to the branding. I've already mentioned that all of Babidi's servants have what appears to be an M script somewhere on their bodies. It's typically on the forehead, but with Yakon it's on his torso. The thing is, though, the series never states what this M means. Given the preponderance of the term Majin as it refers to Buu, fans and other sources have since extrapolated the M to refer to that. It's certainly possible. Then again, since Babidi is frequently referred to as a Madoshi, and the only trait shared by all of these characters is that they are servants of a Madoshi, it could just as likely be short for that. But if Toriyama ever had a specific intention in the 90s for the M to refer to either of those words, it has since leaked out of his brain. Here we go with 2014 again! Because in the same interview where he states that Babidi is Bibidi's doppelganger, he is asked what the M stands for, to which he replies, I think it's probably Ma. After which he laughs. So Ma is definitely in Majin, Maju, and Madoshi, but here at least Toriyama goes for the much broader answer. Aside from the possibility that Yakon could have already been a Maju before Babidi came along, he is the strongest argument for the M standing for Majin or its equivalent, as he is an M-scripted servant, but not a creation of Babidi, who is referred to as Maju. If that reasoning holds, there is a precedent created that could be used to argue that the other servants could be referred to as Majin. That's an argument, not proof. And while Toriyama's words are among other likely rethinkings from 20 years later, they are, as far as I know, the only first-hand source on the subject, and they seem to contradict that. Yakon gives Goku a little more trouble than Pui Pui gave Vegeta, surprising him with retractable claws. Babidi wastes no time, immediately transporting them to Yakon's home, the Planet of Darkness. It is, as the name implies, very, very dark. Unsurprisingly, being unable to see does not hinder Goku, as he can feel the movements of tiny air currents. And I would guess ki as well, but that works too. To really rub it in, Goku demonstrates that even discounting those advantages, he can't ever be put in darkness because he has his own built-in flashlight in the form of Super Saiyan. However, that suits Yakon just fine because apparently, he eats light. Yakon is native to a planet covered entirely in darkness, and he sustains himself on light. Forget whether or not he's inherently a magical beast, Yakon is an evolutionary dead end. How did he find food before Babidi took him away? Unless Planet of Darkness is a recent name that came about because Yakon devoured his entire planet's resources, and Babidi happened to come along at the exact perfect moment before Yakon starved to death, there is no logical way for this creature to exist. Goku takes a gamble here and decides to give Yakon exactly what he wants, pumping him with Super Saiyan light energy until Yakon pulls a Spopovich and explodes. You know, Goku, I noticed that you didn't have the least issue tricking Yakon into a gruesome death, and you certainly didn't lecture Vegeta on killing a much weaker opponent than himself. Nary a peep. You doing okay there? Those of you in the audience who feel I unfairly criticize Goku as performing actions arbitrarily rather than developing naturally from a death-dealing feral child to a compassionate adult, please feel free to explain to me how these actions fit in with that particular interpretation. Dabra pulls another Akuman gambit by jumping ahead of the line to handle Stage 3 by himself. But there is more to the story than our ragtag group descending through Babidi's spaceship. The universe does not revolve around these characters, and just because they left the tournament doesn't mean the tournament isn't continuing without them, as we'll explore next week in Dragon Ball Dissection December. In fact, if you decide to join the $10 and up tier on Patreon, you can see it right now. Please engage with this video and appreciate the list of names who help make this series possible. And keep those calendars open so you know when to check back in. It's December 11th. See you next time! Look at all those wonderful names. Aren't they beautiful?